So I would like to conclude by just putting forth this call to action that it's not enough to just really learn about, Harriet Tubman and, to feel warm and fuzzy inside to celebrate her 200-year bicentennial. It's important to strive to connect with her, from where you are. I'm not saying that you have to start a home like she did for the elderly and, the people who are mentally and physically sick and take care of them for free. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is continuing to do this type of work, finding other things that you can do to be even more proactive, because there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work to be done. And especially as people who are classified as white, you got a lot of work with your people. So in closing, I would like to open up for, any questions that you would have in regards to what I've shared this morning. And again, I want to thank all of you for being here with us this morning. Yes, ma'am. So her question was, did freedom seekers who traveled across to the Canadian side leave any writings or evidence of how they were treated over on the Canadian side? Yes, they did. And one of the things that I conclude from their treatment is that it was equivalent to racism with a manicure. Right? It wasn't as nasty and in your face oftentimes that they experienced here on the American side, but they definitely experienced racism. You had a lot of people who were Canadian that were xenophobic, and they didn't want these people here, right? My ancestor, you spoke of St. Catherine's. Josiah Henson, when he traveled across the Canadian side, he temporarily lived in a community called Little Africa, which was a freedom seeker settlement right in Fort Erie across from the Peace Bridge. When people crossed into the Canadian side, freedom seeker settlements were established as safe havens for people once they crossed. So you had those type of settlements in St. Catherine's, Mississauga, Toronto, Dresden, Niagara-on-the-Lake. You had them in all different places because people understood that freedom wasn't an individual thing, but I had to help perpetuate this network of freedom by doing what I can in order to establish that type of safe haven for people who arrived here. So you had people that, such as Harriet Tubman, that would go back and forth into the United States and assist others as a conductor. A conductor of the Underground Railroad is someone who actually travels with you and takes you from place to place. Not everybody played that role. Some people traveled across to the Canadian side and never set foot in America again, but they were still connected to their people by creating these freedom seeker settlements. Josiah Henson, after he lived temporarily in Little Africa, he convinced the community leaders to come together and purchase land to establish their own community because Little Africa was on Canadian government soil. And he really didn't see the self-determination that he wanted to fully express and for his people to fully experience. So they commissioned him to find land that he thought was suitable, and he went further north to a place that was called Dawn at that time and was able to successfully purchase over 200 acres of land to reestablish what came to be known as the Dawn settlement, where over 180 freedom seekers resettled. He was also instrumental in building the British American Institute, and he led a black militia during the rebellion of 1837. He also came back and forth into the United States in the role of an abolitionist. Through his family, his daughter lived in St. Catherine's, and my grandmother, Inez Dorsey, was born through his daughter. So she lived in that same community in St. Catherine's that Harriet Tubman's family also lived in. She moved over here to the United States in 1925. She had several children. My father was one of those children. And then my father had several children, and I'm one of the most attractive and intelligent of those 7 children. So there are countless stories about the way that freedom seekers were treated by living over on the Canadian side. You know,
And what would you say overall about that? When you say with a manager, what are you saying?
that Malcolm X, he said it best. He said that if Southerners were equivalent to a canine, in the South they bit you with a growl, but up north they bite you with a smile. So their experience was a more passive-aggressive racism. You know, it was more on the form of, oh no, we just don't have anything available. I'm sorry, there's nothing that we can do about it. As opposed to, we don't want you here. What would be the next biggest thing to move us towards racial justice? Teaching children. Teaching children. We have to create early childhood learning spaces where we are invested in children to become the adults that we would like to see. Because if you think about it, all of the problems that we see that are going on, that's not children. These are adults that are causing these problems. And these adults at one point were children. So at all times, it doesn't matter what movement it is, it doesn't matter how progressive we say that it has to start in our children. We have to teach them the right way, because this world is eventually going to be theirs, and we want to make sure that they're the type of citizens that are going to bring more beauty to this world, as opposed to continuing to see the things that are broken. As an educator, I'm just always an advocate for children, and you know, you might see that my disposition is a little light. You know, I smile a lot because I'm around children every day. Every day. So I have an opportunity to see the hope in their eyes. I see it every single day, and I see the possibility in them. So if you're ever feeling down, if you're ever feeling depressed, if you ever feel as if I don't know where to start, invest some time around some children. They will give you some perspective on your infinite potential, as well as your ability to meet challenges. Of all the people who reached Canada, was there ever a proportion of them who returned back to the United States? Absolutely. So when the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, which freed people on paper at least, because you can't legislate people's attitudes, there were a lot of freedom seekers who returned in mass back to the United States to reconnect with their families. You know, one thing that was rare about Josiah Henson's journey is that he took his whole family with him. That was usually unheard of. Most times people had to escape by themselves or in ones or twos, and they usually never were able to take their entire family, especially because slavery separated a lot of families. And sometimes you had no clue where your child was sold or where your brothers and sisters or other family members were actually sold. So people took that as an opportunity to strive to find and search for and reconnect with their families once slavery was abolished on paper here in the United States. So the same way when the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850 and people made an exodus out of the United States to get to freedom on the Canadian side because that federal law didn't apply there, once the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, you also had an exodus to people coming back into the United States to find and reconnect with their families. Thank you again for just being here this morning. And like I mentioned, use this as an opportunity to learn a little more and to find out what you can do to do more than what you are actually doing. And like I mentioned, come in here into this space. I can see the work that you're already doing. And you need to celebrate that, because there's a lot of spaces that are not like this. You know, there's a space in Niagara Falls. We have a Unitarian Universalist church in Niagara Falls right on the south end of our city. But there's not a lot of spaces like this. So you should celebrate the work that you're doing and continuing that work and bringing more children into this as well. Thank you.